Hi, everyone, and welcome. My name is Michelle Purcell, and I'm the Senior Marketing Manager at Resilinc, and I will be your moderator for the presentation today. Thank you for joining and for the time and interest. Many of you are regular attendees of Resilinc's ongoing series on the state of supply chain risk since last year. Welcome back. To those who are attending for the first time, it's great to have you here, and we hope that you will find this valuable, insightful, and helpful in your work. We hope to hear your feedback and what topics you would like to cover. Please feel free to engage with our team throughout our website live chat. Our topic today is really interesting, despite the fact that it is about risks and threats that we have lived through or can look forward to in the coming months. That's right, we will be talking today about the disruptive events of the last 6 months, emerging trends, and the outlook of supply chain in the coming months. Some quick housekeeping to start. We'll be doing a Q&A at the end of the webinar, so please use the question tab to send in your questions. We'll do our very best to cover them today itself, and failing that, we will follow up with you via email. Please know that we will be recording the webinar and it will be available to you after the broadcast. With that, let's get started and check out the agenda for our session. First of all, we will meet our speakers. We will introduce you to our EventWatch AI, which is the source of much of the discussion today as we present the consolidation of 6 months of supply chain news and events. We will focus on the shortages of semiconductors, the current challenges around transportation and logistics. There are several emerging risks, trends, and threats. The focus will be on ESG and cybersecurity. We will talk about the climate change and supply chain mapping. Many of our customers look to Resilinc to provide the outlook for the future. As we navigate the supply chain turbulence of the next few months, it's important for planning experts to identify the key scenarios to plan for. In this case, Resilinc analyzes a lot of data patterns and news reports, as well as projections of how these intersecting news might shape disruptions and global trends and actions in the future. This is my favorite section, so we hope you will stick around until the end. I'm excited to extend a big welcome to our 2 speakers today. Our first speaker, Bindiya Vakil, is Resilinc's Chief Executive Officer and founder. She is recognized as a leader in the area of supply chain risk management. Having worked in sourcing, materials management, and supply chain roles in the high-tech industry at companies including Flextronic, Cisco, and Broadcom. She is credited with developing the market of supply chain risk management solutions when she founded Resilinc. She is a prolific writer and passionate speaker on the topic of supply chain resiliency. Speaking with Bindiya today is Hirra Akhtar, who is Resilinc's Director of Supply Chain Risk Consulting. Hirra acquired her supply chain risk expertise working with many customers over the last many years, helping them to launch their supply chain mapping and monitoring programs from initial discovery and roadmap and global setting stage all the way to resiliency. Her team works with our customers in helping them navigate the landscape of confusing and misinformation and make sense of how to create a simple, effective, and results-oriented supply chain risk management capabilities that grow in maturity and robustness over time. With Hirra's partnership, over 100 clients across different verticals have realized the promised ROI from their visibility and risk programs. Hirra, thank you for joining us. Please take it away.
Thank you, Michelle, and it's great to be speaking about this topic at such a critical time, really, for supply chains globally. Welcome again, everyone. Welcome back to some of you, and thank you again for your time with us today. I want to start off, before we get into the EventWatch numbers, let me first introduce you to EventWatch and tell you a little bit about why it is that is important for you to understand how that will be relevant to, these numbers will be relevant to your business. Now, normally news events that are covered by media are mostly, financial, business updates. They focus on profits, revenues, and stock prices. Well, what does that really mean to supply chain experts, and how does that help them? So in 2010, Resilinc launched the EventWatch to allow our supply chain practitioners and experts to receive alerts about news and disruptions that would or could affect the supply chain performance in days, weeks, and months to come. Now, initially, when we started off in our company's history, we covered the natural disasters, catastrophic types of events, factory fires, but over time, and really in response to our clients' needs, our team began to adopt more AI and natural language processing technologies to cover more and more industries. We're now at about 50 different types of events, an extensive list of chemicals, categories, commodities, metals, and news in over 100 languages. 11 years later, frankly, EventWatch is a trusted service leveraged by companies, news organizations, and analysts because it is the most comprehensive supply chain disruption monitoring service on the planet, entirely focused on supply chain. So now that you've met our EventWatch, let's look at some numbers for the first half of 2021. Next slide, please. Great. So as you can imagine, I work with many companies across many different industries, different verticals across different geographies, and I hear about the challenges that they face in managing their suppliers, in managing that supply chain risk. Also, my team and I work with them to help them create the business case for developing a best-in-class, mature supply chain visibility and risk management capability. And here's what we're hearing. Industry experts that we spoke with have told us that they've spent over 150 million in freight expedites alone in the last one quarter. Last week, CNBC reported that the automotive industry lost 110 billion as a result of the semiconductor shortage. Ford alone reported 2.5 billion in loss, and this week, Toyota reported a 40% drop in production. We really don't need to even tune into the news networks to know this. I was just speaking to a colleague yesterday, and he told me he has been wanting to get a PS5 since November of last year. And unless he was willing to pay a very heavy premium, there was no chance of getting it. We as consumers are feeling the pinch of these global supply chain disruptions in our lives. Factory fires are #1 most frequently reported event type for the past 3 years. We are experiencing a record surge in factory fires in 2021. And just to put this into perspective, we reported close to 340 fires in the first half of 2020. And just in the last 6 months, that number has gone up to 863. That's a 150% increase in factory fires. And again, it's not just the fires. Our data shows a 4-time increase in factory disruptions and downtimes just in the first half of 2021 alone. The industry practitioners we speak with, again, indicate that this is the most disruptive environment that they've ever experienced in their entire professional experiences. And really, our numbers and our data supports that. Now, over 60% of what we've reported, and we've reported close to about 5,500 unique news alerts. Again, to put that into context, that is up from 2,366 news alerts in the first 6 months of 2020, which was already higher than 2019. So 60% of these were actually disruptions that happened at or close to a supplier facility, resulting in direct impact. And this is when Resilinc creates a war room. And our war room allows our customers to collaborate with each other, to collaborate with their suppliers, to analyze exactly which event affects what supplier, what site, products, and parts. No surprise, in 2020, the biggest story that we covered was COVID-19. we reported close to 300 unique COVID-19 related alerts. And we will, dive in deeper into the resurgence that we're experiencing now in the next couple of slides. Now, I want to clarify real quick that we don't just send a bunch of news with EventWatch. Our customers receive an extensive set of capabilities. And this slide kind of shows you how this works on the mobile app. Each user can tailor the alerts that they receive. So we make sure that a memory commodity manager in a high-tech company is not receiving a rubber tire factory fire alert. Additionally, it's not just enough to tell our customers about what's going on. Our EventWatch seamlessly connects and integrates the supply chain mapping intelligence that our customers have loaded into our platform. We help them map their supply chains multiple tiers deep, where we know the risk is the highest, right? And they use that data in the palm of their hands to analyze the impacts due to these supply chain disruptions to their suppliers, sites, parts, and products. The app itself will not only notify our customers, but it will alert the suppliers in the impact region when an event occurs around their global facilities. Now, as you can imagine, this is incredibly valuable for suppliers because EventWatch essentially provides them with an early warning that their customers are about to begin calling them. Often we see that a service manager or an account manager that's based in the US or Europe has no idea about their own company's site out in, say, Vietnam, that's under a flood evacuation order. So the EventWatch service helps suppliers to be prepared, helps suppliers to be better suppliers to their customers by reacting quickly, having answers ready on how they will continue supply despite whatever has happened. Finally, and this is probably my favorite part, and we'll move on. Our customer users can follow events, they can collaborate with each other, they can track supplier progress, exchange information, exchange supplier updates, all within the palms of their hands. So now that I've clarified the workflow, let's look at some of the top disruptions that we've notified our customers and their suppliers about. And let's also check out the year-to-year over change, which frankly really fascinated me. So Resilinc has been publishing our annual numbers since 2013. So really there was a lot of history that we could go back and review. And I can tell you the data is extremely enriching and enlightening. For this, we just focused on the last 3 years, and we can see an incredible change and acceleration of supply chain problems. 2020, again, COVID-19 created a massive disruption to the world. Human health was never top of the EventWatch event list. And incidentally, I want to mention, our AI picked up the very first alert from Wuhan on the 29th of December, 2019. And this was picked up on Chinese social media. After a few days of watching the chatter, we notified our customers on January 4th. So by the time Wuhan was shut down on January 22nd, Resilinc had already sent out 4 to 5 news articles about this event to our customers and their suppliers. Now, in all of 2020, we consolidated COVID updates. There were close to about 320 unique COVID-related news and reports. We honestly could have sent more, but we consolidated the news because too much was happening too fast. Coming into 2021, we've reported so far 64 COVID-19 lockdown specific alerts. We saw a lot of consequences of COVID in our numbers. You might wonder why a factory fire is a consequence of COVID, or a chemical spill for that matter. Our analysis shows that social distancing, employee on-site restrictions that got into place due to these COVID lockdowns resulted in less preventative maintenance, less regular checkups of debris near electrical areas, hot work sites, and therefore a higher incidence of factory fires and chemical spills, which often require regular inspections and audits at these facilities, all of which were again ignored. These activities were not taking place during the lockdowns. Coming back to our numbers, the red shaded areas you see on the screen here represent extreme supply chain disruptions that we lived through. Exponential growth in non-fire factory fire-related disruptions. labor disruptions, largely, again, due to COVID. We can see the port-related problems. And I'll skip over cyber for this section because we will cover it in more detail in a couple of minutes. I want to also point out the extreme weather events, which we all have been observing and living through. One famously disruptive event, the Texas freeze, which has massively disrupted the chemical, resin, plastic, polymer supply chain. Another big problem is the Taiwan drought situation, which is again causing big headaches for the highly water-intensive semiconductor wafer fabs located there. Our research shows farmers and consumers are starved of water in Taiwan to keep these fabs running. Even in countries with ample supply of fresh water, countries like Brazil, Argentina, water supply is hampered in some cases by mismanagement of water resources. And of course, the US West is experiencing record drought, water rationing, potential power outages as these hydraulic dams run on water levels needed for continued operation. And speaking of drought, 2021 has seen record drought and wildfires raging not only across the west coast of the US, but Canada, Russia, Siberia, European countries around the Mediterranean, such as Greece, Turkey, Spain, and Italy. So really what we are looking at here is the perfect storm. In addition to the event types, we monitor everything for each industry. Our EventWatch service covers all the sectors that you see here, and we ensure that an automotive user is not receiving a med device recall message. Our data shows that the life science and healthcare experience a large number of disruptions. And within the life science alone, we saw twice the number of factory fires, 4 times the number of factory disruptions and supply shortages. The news was, of course, dominated by semiconductors, but here our data shows clearly that healthcare and life science experienced a high degree of supply chain problems. And one thing people missed was the vaccine supply chain. For a while, anyone who was involved in anything to do with the vaccine was experiencing supply constraints. If we just look at the last 6 months, just about everything that could have gone wrong has in fact gone wrong. So Bindiya, I'm going to call on you here. Can you maybe talk to the audience about some of the root causes of these supply chain problems?
Yeah, thanks, Hirra. So everyone, thank you for your time. As you can see, Resilinc has extensive amounts of data, and this data paints this incredible picture of the life that we have all lived in supply chain. And these disruptions have affected a record number of industries. And in fact, I would say that all of us, every human on the planet, has probably experienced a supply chain disruption in 2020, 2021. Massive surge in shortages. We're all paying a little bit more for something, whether it's raw materials, freight. We're paying in terms of the allocations at factories, lines down sometimes. Some of the customer impact in terms of suppliers putting customers on allocation, and all of this obviously translates into cash problems, profit warnings, layoffs, and whatnot. Now, a lot of our problems are because of some of the on again, off again reopening, because that does drive consumer behavior. It changes the demand from people wanting large package sizes to maybe small package sizes. And then some of the restrictions and lockdowns as COVID surges in different countries worldwide does affect how suppliers can ramp up or down capacity. And so this already cloudy demand picture was not helped by all the uncertainty around reopening. And then when COVID first started, as you can all imagine, looking back at last year and our personal life too, companies did have to retool some of their manufacturing and distribution networks and processes because the demand shifted from large package sizes, from offices and restaurants not buying as much to consumers buying much more in smaller package sizes at grocery stores and stuff like that. And so then when we started looking at the reopening, the demand started to get rebalanced, but summer Delta variant hit us again. Schools started to get shuttered. And again, this is keeping that murky picture further murky. And companies are having a tough time keeping up with these changes in demand in near real time. And it's really interesting because this really defies all our historical buying behaviors that we typically load into our forecasting modules. All those predictable patterns have gone out the window. Some of our household products have also experienced price increases. Now, interestingly, that is all connected. As you know, in the US, there's a continuing labor shortage. Actually, there is a labor shortage in many parts of the world right now. While we see our onshore manufacturing strategy discussions really pick up steam right now, there's this vision of a widespread factory infrastructure growing in the US. The reality on the ground is that companies are really struggling to fill existing factories with workers, and transporting products, truck driver shortage. The labor shortage is just expected to keep getting worse because, as you can see, the demographics of not just the US, but generally speaking, many of the countries in the West, our aging population is getting older every year. And I mean, frankly, in my 50s and 60s, I don't really want to spend 12-hour days working in a factory or driving a truck. It's just not an attractive option when I could go work flexible hours at an Uber or Lyft, and a service sector employment is available closer to home. So before we really begin bringing factories back onshore, let's make sure we look at the demographics and how labor intensive our supply chain really is, or our manufacturing processes, and see if we can fill these factories with workers. The next one I want to talk about is the container shortage and all the logistics issues. I'm sure you all know by now that global dispersion of containers is extremely skewed. There are many more containers going from Asia to the West than there are going back. And so here we are in the US, containers piling up. In Asia, we have products that are ready to ship, but nothing to load those products into, and because we don't have enough containers there. And of course, we had the Suez Canal blockage, which really made a bad situation worse. The global logistics network is experiencing disruptions at a scale we've never seen before. There were logistics delays and processing delays at ports across the US because of COVID and social distancing. What we also saw is that all the people that could have flown their product when ocean freight became constrained started to fly products, and therefore anything that was high value that would usually fly, like semiconductors, was suddenly vying for capacity with people who would have with companies who would have normally put their products on the ocean. Now, the other thing that we saw in recent developments is China has a strict no tolerance COVID policy, and the 2-week port of Ningbo closure was highly disruptive. We've also seen cargo flight cancellations at various ports. Not to judge the policy itself, it's just that it does have an impact to flow of goods and services. Hirra, any thoughts on that?
You know what, Bindiya, it's an interesting scenario, because here's what's going on, right? Even the ships that do make it out, they're not getting unloaded on time. You know, over 35 container ships backlogged ports of Los Angeles, Long Beach, and you can see this photo. This was actually taken by one of our team members from the air, and he just told us that he recently flew out from the same location, and this was 4 times the backlog. So it certainly isn't getting any better, and this is the highest we've seen since mid Q1, where 40 container ships were waiting to enter. Let me throw in a personal anecdote. I'm still waiting on a furniture order that I placed back in February. So at this point, Bindiya, I've almost even forgotten what I've ordered or what it looked like. So the shipping delays are real. the supply chain disruptions we've experienced in the first half are still ongoing. And there's certainly, again, they're not going away. It's going to be a long, drawn out process. We do not, foresee a near-term quick resolution to these issues. One of the biggest areas of impact, it's received widespread media coverage in the last, 8 to 9 months. And I know, Bindiya, you wrote about this back in February in the Harvard Business Review. And yesterday, you were on Bloomberg TV providing your perspective on this. Can you talk to us a little bit about how we got here and what we can expect in the coming months?
Yeah, this is the shortage of our lifetime, isn't it? When COVID first happened in early 2020, a lot of companies did some massive panic PO cancellation. A lot of companies were at the time anticipating drop in demand. And so this is what happens, that companies lose their place in line. Consumer electronics demand shot up simultaneously, and as we started working from home, etc. And so consumer electronics companies went in and booked up all the available capacity. Now, the demand for some of those products, like automotive for sure, came roaring back, and then immediately we started to see extreme levels of disruptions, because even in the normal course of business, semiconductor lead times are in excess of 16 weeks. There's some capacity utilization issues. Fabs are always running at 93% capacity. This has always been a constrained supply chain. There are so many things in play here. But to cut a long story short, semiconductor shortages are here to stay, not just for the next 6 months or 12 months, but for the foreseeable future, because there really just isn't a good enough near-term solution here. And there's too much detail to go into this for this particular session, but happy to discuss offline. If you guys have questions, do reach out to us. Interestingly, now we have this scenario where a lot of companies and a lot of countries are investing in capacity, but that also drives semiconductor shortages, because equipment for semiconductor needs semiconductors, because this is highly electronic and automated and high-tech capital equipment. And so semiconductor manufacturing equipment lead times are out 12 months. Folks, I've said this about semiconductors since 2013. This is a product that powers the modern human experience, and an extended disruption in this supply chain can end life as we know it for a period of time. It can slow down the rate and pace of human innovation, and it can set us back from our innovation trajectory by years. Well, now that we got that out of the way, I might add it's not the only thing. If you're one of those fortunate ones who did manage to get your allocated supply of semiconductors, then we're still not out of the woods, because we still need to get enough supply of all those other things that are disrupted, like steel and plastics, aluminum, wood, chemicals. And all of these have experienced record force majeures, higher prices, supply constraints, allocations, you name it. From here, I want to point out one interesting thing that has started to make waves. We will talk about it in a coming slide, which is number of labor and human rights violations. Large and reputable companies in Taiwan were recently accused of oppressive labor practices by migrant workers. Now, Resilinc's mission is to help our customers make their supply chain resilient, sustainable, fair, and secure. And so I want to really shift a little bit and talk about ESG next, a topic that a lot of us are watching extremely carefully right now. As we look at this slide, I want to say first, before I jump into this, is that I believe with all of my heart that supply chains power life itself. It was supply chains that lifted hundreds of millions of people in China and Southeast Asia out of poverty. Supply chains have the power to change lives, create livelihoods, and make life as we know it possible. We take this for granted, though. And we've seen evidence of this firsthand all of this year when failure of supply chain to keep up with us has cost lives. We have been delayed patient care, and failure of supply chain has created massive economic and financial problems for companies and countries. Now, there is a dark side to supply chain, and what you're seeing here is that dark side where it has been publicly exposed. We all know there is a cost to keeping our supply chain running, and the price is paid by the poor, the desperate, the destitute, who migrate for jobs, for better lives, for better employment, only to find an unkind world taking advantage of their situations. Supply chain creates employment opportunities. It is absolutely true, but they are not always fair. And for some populations, they are downright exploitative. So now I want to be clear, I'm not pontificating on the ethics of the supply chain from my high pedestal. We're not doing that. Here at Resilinc, we boil everything down into one thing and one thing only, which is the problem of supply chain risk and financial impact of anything that can cause that from the supply chain that can cause financial impact, and that very much falls within our domain. So as risk and procurement experts, it is really imperative that we make sure our supply chain is clean and clear. There are no embarrassing violations that can negatively impact our brand. In a worst case scenario, this can also result in our business license being revoked, one of our suppliers' business license being revoked, or export-import license get revoked. Now, to take an example of this, let's talk about Top Glove. It's a company that is one of the largest producers of latex gloves. It exports to over 195 countries. They have 47 factories, most of them in Malaysia. A few months ago, U.S. Customs and Border Patrol found evidence that they use forced labor in production of disposable gloves. And so in the March of 2021, there was a ban on their products. And in July, they seized some shipments of their products. And Top Glove was supposed to have an IPO in June that had to get delayed. So as you can see, massive impact, customer brand impact, impact to future revenue to the extent that an IPO had to be delayed. So an ESG violation is not just an embarrassment issue or a fine of $1,000 a month or $10,000 a month. It can have material financial consequences to companies. So to make data on this, make sense of some of this, what you are seeing, Resilinc's EventWatch reports on ESG news. And we have been doing this over the last few years, but what we are seeing is that the instances of reported violations are increasing. This doesn't mean supply chains have not been exploited and are exploitative now. What it means is that now with the prevalence of NGOs, social media, cell phone cameras everywhere, the unattractive side of supply chain is coming to the forefront now more than ever before. And in the first half of 2021, we saw a 10x increase in reports of labor violations compared to the first half of 2020. We do see some companies and some countries are frequent violations, but in this past year, we saw reputable companies get fined or sued by communities. They were extracting more than their allocated natural resources, particularly water, especially in a year of extreme drought. This is a massive problem for governments trying to support their communities. California, for example, sent a cease and desist letter to a reputable company, awesome brand like Nestle. And The Guardian reported that last year they withdrew 58 million gallons of water, which is far more than the permitted 2.3 million gallons for their water brand Arrowhead. And this is not, by the way, the only water violation in California, because they have had similar accusations in Oregon, Pennsylvania, Maine, Michigan. And so what's happening is that we at Resilinc are picking up when suppliers worldwide in 100 languages get outed, if you will, by NGOs or governments or called out for this type of behavior, and we make our customers aware of them. And so from all of us as supply chain experts, those days of plausible deniability of the past, those are over. This is where a strong ESG monitoring and screening program becomes very essential. So it is not just an emerging concern, this is a compliance issue. More and more regulation, legal requirements are anticipated. There's already a movement around this. And companies will be required to conduct extensive due diligence, not only at their own factories, but also at those of their suppliers. And it won't be enough to just get some suppliers' corporate office addresses and get those certified. They're going to have to map the suppliers' supply chains, know factory and subcontractor locations, as well as sub-tier suppliers, and then screen, assess, and monitor them. Now, the issue of labor exploitation has been an emerging flashpoint between China and the West. And I'm sure many of you heard, but when recently when China was accused of labor violations in Xinjiang, the government's response was pretty devastating. For example, in March, the government wiped out H&M's entire internet presence across China. And that triggered a loss of 70+ million in sales. The fight over a free-flowing internet in China shows that when it comes to some things, Beijing does not compromise. And so we really should ask our customers to plan for the government to double down on its stance, and be very cautious as we start to really pay attention to this, and really recommend increasing audit and monitoring of China-based suppliers. Hirra works with many of our customers. Hirra, do you want to address how you see leaders getting a proactive stance on this issue?
Absolutely, Bindiya. So 2 ways, right? There's 2 ways to tackle our customers, and leaders in the industry are tackling this issue. The first is what you see on the far left here, that's a supplier screening. So one interesting thing to note is that because of the entity matching and the normalization that Resilinc does, we have about a decade's worth of data on suppliers. So our customers are leveraging this data to screen their suppliers proactively for lawsuits, fines, emissions, chemical spills, labor violations, all as part of their ECG or their supplier quality performance programs. We work with a leading global pharmaceutical company that uses our supplier screening service to vet onboarding vendors. So even before engaging with them, they use our service to vet those suppliers out for these adverse events. And just in the last 6 months, so the last first half of 2021, we screened close to 30,000 suppliers for them across 190 countries. And the process is simple. You just provide us the name of the supplier, and you receive a detailed report of all the negative news that goes back as much as 11 years on those suppliers. The second that you see on the right here is, in addition to the active monitoring of these suppliers for these adverse publications, either through the screening or the EventWatch, our customers are using our risk assessment capabilities to quantify and to analyze their suppliers' ECG management capabilities. So Resilinc does give our customers access to an assessment library where they can launch industry standard risk questionnaires to, again, gauge their suppliers' vulnerabilities or their strengths in the ECG capabilities. They can launch one of our assessments, or they can completely tailor the questionnaire based on their business needs. And these returned assessments, again, yield risk scores. So the ability to quantify and visualize this on dashboards where your teams or their teams are not spending time collecting this data, but analyzing and really pinpointing and identifying those suppliers with gaps, and then working with those suppliers proactively, launching mitigation actions and tracking those to closure. Another thing I wanted to point out here is, we have partnerships with experts in the field like EventWatch for sustainability scores. So some of our customers are also using our APIs to suck in EventWatch scores as one source of monitoring their supplier sustainability practices, and they're ingesting that into our risk model. So another thing that I think, just to pivot a second from the ECG, talking about cybersecurity issues. We've been monitoring, again, cybersecurity is one of the event types that Resilinc monitors, and we've been monitoring this issue for over a decade now. And in the first half of 2021, just in 6 months, we've seen close to 145 unique cybersecurity disruptions across the supply chain alone. And this has affected tens of thousands of companies, directly or indirectly. And just in the last 6 months, we've seen a higher number than all of the cyber attacks that we reported in 12 months of 2020. So cyber attacks are definitely growing. I mean, they're growing at an exponential rate. Our data certainly supports this. We're seeing, a lot of very reputable companies getting attacked. Gartner predicts direct financial impact of attacks resulting in over 50 billion losses by 2023. And by the way, the indirect losses can be many times this number. As we saw, we can all relate to this. Recently, with the Colonial Pipeline of cyber attack, individuals and businesses, consumers had to pay more for gas and dwindling supplies of critical products. So, cyber attacks are the supply chain threat of our generation. And this is why I encourage our customers to proactively launch at least annual cyber assessments with their direct, indirect, and even their critical sub-tier suppliers. And you often hear people think, well, our InfoSec team owns this. This is not my problem. So Bindiya, let me ask you 2 questions. First, why is this something our supply chain experts should worry about? And 2, what is best in class for supply chain experts? What should they be doing to evaluate cyber risk?
Yeah, this is so critical, because when I hear that this is not my problem, or my InfoSec team has this, it really raises some critical red flags, because the supply chain in the physical dimension could be completely fine, but if a supplier has an outage, or there's some kind of a threat because a supplier who connects into one of our systems or is out, then we can't transact. And as we see, when we can't transact, the supply chain shuts down in the physical dimension, just because there's a problem in the virtual dimension. And that right there is a supply chain risk problem. And that is why we cannot just let IT do their thing. The IT team protects your internal systems against threats to your internal technologies and middleware and hardware and software. It's supply chain's job to make sure we are making sure our suppliers also are paying attention to this threat and have best-in-class capabilities for things like the software that connects in, the products that they put into our products that are now connecting to, like we are using a lot of IoT devices now. These systems are hardware, come hardware and software with connectivity, which means a vulnerable product in our products could bring our entire systems down. So this is a supply chain problem. And it's really, really critical not to say, oh, we got this assessment from our supplier when we first did business with them. We had them fill out an extensive cyber questionnaire. This needs to be an annual process, making sure suppliers are getting SOC 2 Type 2, ISO 27001 types of certifications, 24/7 monitoring. We in supply chain, we have thousands of suppliers, so it's impossible for us to keep an eye on which suppliers have been publicly reporting a cyber attack or a cyber threat. And so it's really critical to have monitoring in place for all of your suppliers. And then, there are reputable third-party companies who do create cybersecurity questionnaires that can be assessed with your suppliers. Resilinc certainly has our supplier cybersecurity assessment. We will be doing a joint webinar with one of our customers in the upcoming weeks. So keep an eye out for how one of our customers looks at this threat and monitors, assesses, and manages suppliers. It's best in class. And I think the thing is here that we need to make sure that we do this refresh regularly, because these attacks are getting more and more sophisticated, which means something that a supplier did 2 years ago may be completely outdated by now. Next, I want to just shift focus to climate, because in the summer of 2021, and no risk discussion can be complete if we don't talk about climate, the weather, and what this year has done to our supply chain. And in that context, I think it's really important to talk about also what we expect to happen going forward. Now, I think we all saw in IPCC, the IPCC in August warned that there would be increasingly disruptive heat waves, droughts, flooding, etc., and that a key temperature limit is expected to break in just over 10 years. And immediately there was some debate about how dire is the conclusion really. And the Wall Street Journal said, well, don't panic, but we do need to act. And some others said that if we don't meet the aggressive emissions targets, then there is likely to be accelerated change. Now, even in the most, interestingly, the IPCC had multiple scenarios, and even in the most optimistic one, where we do come together as a world and successfully drastically cut emissions, which is obviously, to restate, quite optimistic, and our emissions begin to drop sharply today onwards, they are still going to see, we will still see global temperatures peaking. And so unless our scientists really get together and invent some kind of breakthrough way to avert irreversible climate change, I would say that it's a reasonable supply chain planning assumption that we as supply chain experts plan that there will be further acceleration in climate-related disruptions, and we do some planning today. This summer, we saw wildfires across the Arctic for the second year in a row, record amount of carbon dioxide released into the atmosphere permanently. Record droughts, record floods, record heat waves, fires. I mean, we saw extreme heat waves in places where there should not be heat waves, like Oregon and Washington. And these are just facts. This is lived and documented human experience. This is not a scientific simulation that we can all debate about. And so people have lost lives, economic losses and damage to infrastructure worth billions, transportation routes, logistics routes, communication, power equipment damage. This has happened. And so we as supply chain experts have to reckon with this real threat to our livelihoods and our supply chain. So as we look ahead, sometimes I see this is a little bit alarming to me when I hear some companies or executives waiting for that post-COVID world that will look like the pre-COVID world. However, I will say that the smart supply chain strategist must prepare today for this scenario that the pre-COVID world is a world long gone. Not only because of COVID, not because COVID happened, but because of what we are seeing, this decisive, this accelerating change in climate that is no longer possible to deny in the summer of 2021. So if we're still questioning the value or ROI of investing in a supply chain risk resilience and visibility program, if we are still in a wait and watch mode, then we might be the laggards. We might find ourselves reacting as the supply chain hits us, and we might pay for our inaction. And that cost of not doing something about risk is very, very high. We have seen this too. So in supply chains, as it is in life, the best strategy is plan for the worst case scenario, right? This is a planning exercise. Plan for that worst case scenario, hope for the best. And so as we look to plan for the new normal, we must invest in supply chain transparency, visibility, and a collaborative relationship with suppliers where business continuity and supply assurance is the number1 priority and not cost savings. So when we look at mapping, mapping is foundational. Without mapping, if we're running our supply chain, it's like we're driving in the fog with full speed, no sensors. I mean, hitting something is not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So what we are seeing is that starting 2021, there are companies that have really begun investing in improving their visibility. This was a sporadic thing. This is now a snowball. This trend is the norm going forward. Procurement experts will need to know where their parts are made, by whom, who are the suppliers, not only the direct ones, the subcontractors and sub-tiers too. Not only mapping the supply chain to site level, but going down to part level. We really see, as we see the record number of disruptions, that the good thing is that there are technologies today to help us deal with these disruptions. We have advanced digital techniques, technologies, networks, collaboration tools that can help us stay ahead on risk. And when it comes to mapping, I'm going to ask Hirra to talk about really quickly how our customers do supply chain mapping, what it takes, and how to be really, really successful at it.
Yeah, Bindiya. So, Resilinc, I would say Resilinc is a world leader in supply chain mapping. I mean, our customers are not only mapping out their supplier manufacturing footprint, we're going down to the part level, and we're identifying not only where these parts or materials are coming from primarily, but where are their backup sites? How quickly can they start supplying from these backup sites? What will be their time to recover in case of major disruption at their primary site? So we map the sub-tier supply chain going down multiple tiers, supplier to supplier, supplier to site, to categories. And in some situations, getting BOM and AVL for each part procured. So over the last 11 years, we have painstakingly been mapping the supply chain genome through active supplier participation. And our customers are leveraging the work that has been done from other customers before them using our LinkedIn model. And what is that model? It's the ability for the suppliers to share that information onto the Resilinc database once, and then securely approve that access multiple times to this visibility data with other trusted customers. So, more and more customers, they're now looking to tackle this challenge. And they want to do this without causing supplier fatigue, making suppliers doing hours of work, hiring an army of people. Resilinc, helps our customers accelerate this adoption curve by years, literally. So instead of, again, taking an army of people, months, if not years, our customers have successfully worked with us to get access to the data that the suppliers have already shared securely on our platform. Your suppliers will have to share that access, but many suppliers are now extremely familiar with this process. And some are sharing their visibility data with over 40 to 50 customers without constantly replicating the data entry. So, as we close and move to the final item on today's agenda, I want to bring us back to the here and now. So as we look ahead, what should we expect over the next 6, 12, 18 months? So Bindiya, can you talk to us about how supply chain experts can plan and prepare for what's to come?
Yeah, so this is important. The next 6 months are expected to continue to be disrupted. Historically, Resilinc's data does show the rate of disruptions in the second half of year tends to be higher than the first half, and this year is not expected to be different, especially given the environment we're already in. Companies are trying to get holiday shipments delivered, hurricane season's underway, schools are open. So there are multiple things that will start to pile on top of the COVID and the current environment itself. We talked a lot today about ESG, cyber, climate. We didn't cover so much about China, but I do want to talk really quickly about the emerging country China, not the China that was emerging, but the China that has emerged. And we do see a little bit of some trends that are concerning from a supply chain expert. We know we can't lift and shift our supply chain overnight, and we are starting to see a little bit of that authoritarian position on things like labor, cyber, the internet, Hong Kong. And so given how reliant we are on Taiwan and our allies in South Korea, Japan, yesterday, Japan talked about, quote unquote, they use the word crisis. So just things like that need to be watching. Now, to be clear, China is an exciting and fast-growing market for our products for US and European countries. And so for these and other reasons, some amount of supply chain will remain in China, but for many of the critical supplies that are bound for the West, we must plan now to have a backup strategy. By the way, we are nearing the top of the hour, but because this is such a critical topic, we do want to go ahead and just take a few extra minutes and take some final questions. We have a couple that have been received, and we'll try to take them, but thank you for attending, and do stay on if you do have time and flexibility, as we will be taking some questions. Now, coming back to China and some of the conversations around onshoring and nearshoring, we have already seen customers begin to ask their suppliers to provide non-China alternatives as they look at manufacturing footprint and network design for the future. Here in the US, we do see there's an emerging push for a Pan-American supply chain network that is land-based, that bypasses ocean freight because of all the ocean issues that we have seen and experienced this year. China itself has a fairly aging population, and labor costs there is actually rising fast. Mexico, on the other hand, relatively younger labor force, and Central America, even better. Younger and right there connected by land to the US. And so a regional land-based network between the US and Central America, Mexico just makes perfect sense, going all the way to Canada. And within the EU, we are starting to see more partnership develop between Africa and the EU as well. And so we will not be talking about this a lot today, but we did do a webinar on this, as well as a Harvard Business Review article a few days ago, so please do look it up if you are interested. And also recommend, if your customers have not asked you yet to show them regionalized alternatives, you might want to start thinking about it, as they might ask you within the next 6 to 12 months. In general, we do expect, the good news is that we do expect a lot of increased government support and participation as governments now are really looking at critical sectors in giving subsidies and things like that. So do lobby your local organizations to make sure that you take advantage of that for your industry. Now, obviously, outlook always looks a little bit grim, but I am an optimist at heart, and so I have to say this at the end. In all of our lifetime, there has never been a more exciting time to be in supply chain, because unlike the last 20 years or so, our generation here and now and going forward, we will be the generation to design the supply chain of the future. So looking forward to making the future happen. All right, so with that, 2 minutes passed. If we have any questions, Hirra or Michelle, back to you guys.
Thank you, Bindiya and Hirra. Let's get some questions answered. And again, if you have any questions, please send it via the question tab. There is a question, we just got one in. And our question is, what is the immediate outlook?
Yeah, I'll talk about that. Immediate outlook, as you can see, as you saw on the last slide, was the 6-month outlook is extremely disruptive. There are so many things at play happening right now. We still aren't past the container shortage. Logistics is extremely delayed. We see typically people are stocking up as in addition to buying for holiday season. So and because we see so many shortages across so many commodities, I mean, there are shortages on steel, wood, aluminum, I mean, commodities that were generally ocean bound, that there's no near-term resolution unless the market just crashes overnight, which is not expected because a lot of countries still have stimulus going on, and that does bode well for demand picture. And so we must expect from a supply chain standpoint that the near-term outlook is continued disruptions and widespread disruptions.
Thank you, Bindiya. With that, we will close our session for today. Thank you everyone for joining, and we really hope to see you again in our next session in a few weeks. As a reminder, the recording will be available shortly on our website to watch on demand. You're welcome to check out our website and download the annual report with the case studies, ROI, and best practices to help you get started and build your risk program. Again, thank you and have a wonderful day.